Our guest today is Pat McGurn, who is Special Counsel and Head of Strategic Research and Analysis for ISS, Institutional Shareholder Services. Pat has been at ISS a long time. He's been sitting down with me for nearly 20 years to discuss what to expect over the upcoming proxy season. I thank him for that. I'm Brock Romanek, today on Zippy Point. So Pat, thanks so much for doing this. It's been a long time that we've been doing this annual program. And you've been at ISS a long time. Are you the longest serving member at ISS?
No, this was my 25th proxy season in 2020, but there's actually some folks, a handful that have been around longer than I have, I think. And so it is a lot of new people, I think, as a result of our acquisitions and just standard turnover. But again, heading into, I guess, proxy season 26 now. So.
Yeah, I know you've been not on the speaking circuit as frequently, just like myself. And so for the pandemic, working remotely, that hasn't really been that big a change for you personally.
I had been working remotely for the last 5 years, so that wasn't a big change for me. It was for other members of our organization. Our IT department performed literal miracles back in March and April, and they literally had to get 2,000 people, online in time for the kickoff of the proxy season. We were literally racing the clock in global markets as you were seeing those stay-at-home orders come into place. So we were just getting people set up in European markets after we had done so in Asia first, I think, and then finally when some of them started hitting in the U.S. So we were able to get everyone in place and with the adequate technology. It was a miracle almost, but it just shows that those business continuity plans do make a big difference, and it's not just a formal exercise to go through. It's something where we had to move because of natural disasters or operations to remote locations before, but having to do it for the entire firm at one point in time, it really was a testament to the fact that we had gone through those training exercises before.
Yeah, I can't imagine going through this without the internet, without computers. It really would be like back in the caveman.
Yeah, I can't imagine if we were still in a paper world with proxies like we were 25 years ago when I started at ISS. I think it could not have occurred. I think and not being able to hold in-person meetings would have been a major limitation. So it was, if there had to be a time for this to happen, at least we had the technology in place.
So let's dig into ISS's policy updates each year, as you have been doing for quite a while now. Your clients as well as outside parties were allowed to give input, and then draft policies were put out there for comment, and then we have the final policies. So the first one I want to talk about is the board gender diversity policy that you've had for a while, but now it's been updated. The 1-year exemption is now gone for those boards that don't have any women on the board. That going forward, it's clear that there won't be any exceptions for if it's an all-male board, right?
The only remaining exception will be if a board just lost their gender diversity during the last couple of months. If somebody had to leave the board, if there was certainly a death or disability of a director that led a board that had gender diversity at last year's meeting, not to have it now, I think we'll give that company some additional time. But the idea of making commitments to add a woman during the next year, if you didn't have one already, I think, and you hadn't had one in the past, that transitional language went away. So going forward, if you're a S&P 1500 or a Russell 3000 company and there are no women serving on the board and you haven't had one within the last 12 months, chances are you're going to get a negative recommendation against the head of the nominating committee or the other relevant directors.
And then, of course, a huge topic this year is racial and ethnic diversity. So when it comes to board diversity in that way, ISS's policy has been updated as well.
One of obviously the big events besides the pandemic this year were the social justice protests. I think that really did transform the corporate governance debate over board diversity. I think that while the gender diversity numbers were coming up, and the good news is that we're down to 6.3% of Russell 2000 boards having 0 women in them. So some of the work has been done that, and actually more than 25% of Russell 2000 boards have at least 30% women now. So I think there was going to be a turn to re-examine racial and ethnic diversity anyway, but when the protests took place and they really raised the tenor of the debate over these issues, it almost overnight made this #1 priority for a lot of our institutional clients. I think when we did our survey this year, almost 60% of investors indicated that boards should aim to reflect the company's customer base and the broader society in which they operate by including directors drawn from racial and ethnic minority groups. So strong outpouring of that. I think that sentiment, led us to consider and draft a new policy. I think it'll be similar to what we did for gender diversity. That is, in year 1, it's really more of a disclosure only approach. Our benchmark research reports in 2021 for Russell 3000 and S&P 1,500 index firms will highlight the lack of racial or ethnic diversity, I think, or lack of disclosure of such, to help investors to identify firms where they might reach out to the board and engage and foster a dialogue over the course of that 12-month period. But then come 2022, for companies in those same indexes where the board has no apparent racial or ethnic diverse members, we'll recommend against or withhold for the chair of the nominating committee or the other directors on the board on a case-by-case basis. So the same idea of a transition year until February of 2022, but taking aim at nominating committees where there isn't action being taken.
Yeah, I have a separate vid guide where I just illustrate some examples of how companies have used graphics to illustrate their gender and ethnic racial diversity. And oftentimes they lump those together, but going forward, in order to show ISS what the board's composition looks like, companies are going to have to break that out, right? Gender and racial ethnic diversity into 2 separate graphics?
Yeah, aggregate diversity statistics, if they blend together, the issues of gender, race, and ethnicity aren't as helpful to us in making those determinations. So yeah, we want to see them adequately split out to be very specific with relation to the presence of gender, racial, and ethnic diversity in the board.
Now, if a company happens to overlook this and in their proxy don't break it out, are they going to have to file additional soliciting materials to break that out when they make a disclosure like that to ISS, or is that too early to tell?
Yeah, but we always go off of, publicly filed documents with the SEC. I think so if companies want to get credit that we can bring through to our clients here, they'll probably have to do some supplemental filings. But I do expect a lot of companies this year will provide at least the aggregate disclosure broken out by gender, race, and ethnicity. I think, and hopefully we'll see even more disclosure. I'm thinking with the election results now, I think that it's only a matter of time before the SEC formalizes a disclosure requirement. I think that a lot of companies, seeing that handwriting on the wall, will probably take action this year rather than waited until 2022.
Yeah, I've seen anecdotal evidence, friends of mine that are of color that have been approached to join boards that were not at the CEO level. And so it looks like some companies are going below still might be in the C-suite, but below the CEO level to add people to the board. But let's talk about director tenure, because in some cases, some directors might be replaced instead of just enlarging the size of the board. What is the ISS policy in that area now?
A lot of our clients have been really moving towards more board refreshment tools and their support of them. So whether it's mandatory retirement ages or board or term or tenure limits. I think because of the desire to open up board seats to add diversity into the ranks of directors, we're seeing a greater willingness on the part of institutional investors to support those provisions. I think that having been said, it's pretty clear when we talk to clients, they'd prefer this to be handled by robust boardroom evaluation where directors are being replaced when new skill sets and greater diversity is needed in the boardroom overall. But we are seeing at least some movement by institutional investors, particularly on the issues of term and tenure limits. I think so we're changing our policy from a generally against approach to a case-by-case approach on these. I think we're cognizant that some companies have adopted tenure limits, in particular term limits, that really were aimed more at, I think, at limiting independence in some issues than anything else by making them apply only to the outside directors and not inside founding family members and others, I think. But, so it won't be a carte blanche approach, but if there's a reasonable explanation provided for the company for the proposal that they put in place to adopt a term or tenure limit, we will be supportive of that. We're still not going to be supportive of age limits. I think that's an artificial constraint and actually could possibly get companies into, legal issues if raised by directors over age discrimination. So I think the better way to handle it, if you're going to, is by addressing it via a term or tenure limits. For shareholder proposals, and we rarely see them on the topic showing up on ballots, we'll look to see if there are problems in the boardroom at those companies and then look at the reasonableness of what's been suggested by the shareholder proposal proponent.
Yeah, I feel like I'm old these days, but I checked the New York Times vaccine line tracker. I'm in number 268 million. So I'm not quite old enough yet to perhaps, if there was a mandatory age limit for directors, I would not be anywhere near that. There's an advantage to being old these days, not just Medicare and Social Security. Let's talk about virtual shareholder meetings. That obviously was a huge thing, in my opinion. Annual meetings, obviously have been a non-event for most companies, but it really raised the profile of the annual meeting itself this year as more attention was paid to how companies actually conduct their annual meeting. And so I think that's also reflected in some of the updates to the ISS policy regarding virtual meetings, right?
We really had never had a standalone policy on virtual meetings per se. I think it was an issue that a lot of companies adopted a number of years ago when state laws changed to allow the convening of electronic meetings. They went ahead and adopted that enabling legislation as part of their governing documents. I think just to be clear, though, we wanted to adopt a formal policy to say that we were willing to, if put for shareholder approval, to recommend in favor of bylaw or charter changes that allow for the convening of electronic meetings. But we wanted to make it clear that our clients' preference has been and remains for hybrid meetings, a combination of a physical meeting with an electronic forum going on in some structure, whether it be audio, video, hopefully the combination of both, I think. And so we adopted the new standalone policy, I think, and as long as a company does not put language in their proposal that indicates that they're only going to hold virtual meetings and they're precluding the opportunity to actually hold a physical in-person meeting, we'll generally be in favor of them. It's a case-by-case approach, so we'll look at if a company has a bad track record or a good one there in that regard. But again, we'd like to reiterate the fact that our clients prefer hybrid. That's their wish list. And so having flexibility under the policies that are put forth for shareholder approval is going to be the key.
Yeah, I know some companies in their proxy during 2020 did indicate whether they would be going back to a physical in-person meeting after the pandemic is over. Most companies were silent about that, and probably smartly so, because since the pandemic has continued to last into this proxy season, at least early for those companies with a 12/31 fiscal year end. But it'll be interesting to see if we get shareholder proposals, if some companies that used to have in-person meetings now forego them forever, or at least they intend to, and whether there's some pushback from investors, whether they've gotten used to the hybrid meeting or the virtual only meeting. We'll see. In the hybrid meetings this year were just one or two people, management people in person, because companies had to do it on the fly, conduct an annual.
No, I think
meeting.
investors realized that, this year was the exception rather than the rule, and that there were going to be some problems at some firms because of just the last minute nature of putting the e-meeting, the virtual meeting into place. I think about going forward, I think there's an expectation that, that the goal will be to hold a hybrid meeting wherever possible, and companies should provide some explanation outside of limitations of health and safety, which are still going to be present in 2021. I think as to whether they, on a going forward basis, once the pandemic is under control, return to a hybrid meeting structure or continue to go virtually only. And so I do expect that's when we may see some pushback coming from investors, is once the health and safety concerns are out of the way.
Now, the provision, the policy update that only a lawyer could love, that I saw a lot of buzz about among lawyers, is the updated policy regarding the federal and state forum bylaw, for exclusive bylaw forum provisions. What was that updated policy?
Yeah, it is a policy that only a lawyer can love, I guess. I think, but it was driven by the fact that we saw a change in the case law in Delaware, which really spurred a lot of companies to adopt the federal exclusive forum provisions. And as long as we were looking to adopt a new policy with those, we decided to revisit the state exclusive forum policies as well. I think from the federal perspective, from talking to our clients, there was very little sort of pushback. I think as long as the scope of the proposal on the federal side wasn't going to limit you to a particular federal district, as long as it allowed you to go into your local federal district court to bring a federal securities action. I think that people did not look at those as being overly restrictive or see any unintended consequences that could come from them. And so I think the idea that they would generally approve those federal forum provisions, and it was indicated in the vote results this year for the handful of companies that did put them up to votes, that it doesn't seem to be an issue of any significant controversy for investors. On the state side, we've got a lot of experience looking at these proposals now, and we have not seen a lot of empirical evidence as to how they've harmed shareholder interests. I think especially with respect to Delaware. And so I think that's why we wanted to carve out an exception under our policy for Delaware, given the Chancellery Court and the deep body of precedent that's available in Delaware. I think we were convinced that having those cases heard in Delaware was probably a good thing, I think, and so we tweaked our policy. The remaining jurisdictions will remain sort of open-minded, I guess. We'll take a look at these provisions when they are put up for shareholder approval, and I'll add that they usually are not. I think a lot of boards have unilaterally adopted these bylaw provisions without giving shareholders an opportunity to vote. I think we're currently being lobbied, as you might expect, by some of the law firms that say, well, we've got a business court here and fill in the blank on the state name. And so we think that you should consider whether, it would be the right thing to have exclusive forum provisions in our jurisdictions as well. I don't see us making those changes, any more changes before the 2021 proxy season, but we'll look at how these issues play out over the next couple months, and then we'll see if we need to tweak the policy any further. Part of this is putting the ball back in the court of critics of these proposals too. I think when they were first put into place a number of years ago, you know, there were sort of the sky is falling predictions and so forth, and they never really came to fruition. If we start seeing some problematic activities that severely limit shareholders' rights to bring litigation, then we could reconsider the policy. But for now, I guess you could say the ball is back in the court of critics to prove that there's some you know, harm being done to shareholders by having these provisions put in place.
And then back in March, when the market was crashing, a lot of companies ran out and instituted some poison pills without shareholder approval, dead hand pills. And so I noticed that ISS has updated its policy in that regard.
Yeah, just on dead hand poison pills, this was one of those weird things, I guess, about the pandemic. I think, and I'm putting it down to just maybe some poor legal drafting, but dead hand and slow hand poison pills had almost disappeared from the scene entirely. And we had started writing them out of our policies because there were so few left that it was just housekeeping that was going on. But during the pandemic, some of the short-term rights plans were adopted, contain these dead hand or slow hand features, I think, and so we had to tweak our policy and restore some of the language there that made it clear that we do view those provisions as being, you know, violations of good governance practices, I think, and so we did want to reemphasize the fact that that they can lead, even in a short-term rights plan, to a potential recommendation against the board of directors that puts a pill with such a provision in place as a material governance failure. So I'm hopeful that we see them disappear from the scene and go back into extinction. But for whatever reason, a handful of companies decided it was time for a slow hand or a dead hand pill, and we just wanted to restart the clock as a result.
And then ISS also updated its policy about advance notice for shareholders to submit a director nomination or shareholder proposal from 60 days to 120 days, I believe.
Yeah, we did. This is one of those issues that's been around for a long time. Again, in the US, it's an issue that rarely is the subject of a standalone vote. There are some other markets, such as Canada, where they have to be approved by shareholders, where it's a little more controversial. But here in the US, the 120 days prior and allowing at least a 30-day submission period, I think seems to be the norm now. And given the fact that shareholders do like some additional notice when there is going to be an activist challenge at a meeting, I think, and the need in this day and age for engagement between the activist investor and the board of directors, I think we felt that that sort of what is standard practice in the market today was sufficient in protecting shareholders' interests. So I think that our policy change, it really does just balance the needs for you know, enough flexibility on the part of a proponent who wants to offer business or put a nomination in place versus providing shareholders and the board adequate time to address the issues raised by those submissions.
So we talked earlier about social justice, but sustainability and also social justice, not just, you know, board diversity, but in general, the number one hot topic other than the pandemic. And so I noticed that ISS also clarified what their policy is about board oversight of that area.
Yeah, there was even internal debate within ISS as to whether our material governance failure provision encompass risks related to environmental and social concerns. We just wanted to make it explicit in the policy via this clarification that significant risk oversight failures include issues related to the environment and social concerns, including climate change, and that they will constitute material governance failures, and as a result may trigger vote recommendations against board members. I think to me, I think this was sort of settled law under our policies at least, but we wanted to make it explicit given the fact that some people still sort of view E, S, and G as sort of separate entities rather than the combination of the three in a grouping. But the way the policy reads now, we just added language that's really in a footnote that demonstrably poor oversight of risk risk related to environmental and social issues, including climate change, or examples of the risk oversight issues that will trigger our policy.
And I assume your research analysts are pulling information generally from the news about that and not relying solely on proxy disclosure or this is,
Oh no, we've got myriad sources to look at, and most of these are the very high profile instances. I mean, this is the policy that we've kicked in place where there were major, fines or scandals at companies. These are not, I don't expect to see, scores of instances where we use this policy. It's going to be used in exceptional circumstances, where there's a clear oversight failure that's significantly hurt the reputation of the company, damage the stock price, damage the value of the franchise generally. So this was not, it really was a clarification. We wanted to make it clear to the marketplace that it's the full suite of oversight issues that we're going to look at under the policy, but I don't think it means we're going to see an explosion in the number of times that we actually apply this policy.
And I should just mention that ISS clarified that when it comes to gender gap shareholder proposals, that when it's a global, the global statistics at a country to country data can be hard to rely on because different countries collect that data different ways. And so you made it clear in your policy that
yeah, gender gap shareholder proposals, there have been some different flavors of them in recent years, and we just wanted to make it clear that under a policy that, because of the fact that state and local laws, I think, make determinations of racial and ethnic minority groups differ from country to country, from region to region. So a company providing a global race ethnicity statistic is not all that meaningful. And that goes for proponents of the proposals as well, to broaden something out to provide a number that's not meaningful. I think is not something that that we'd support if a shareholder proponent was asking for it either. So it is one of those issues where we just wanted to make it clear the types of disclosures we're actually looking for. There are ones that investors can actually take action based upon.
And then the last 2 years, ISS has generally been supportive of shareholder proposals regarding mandatory arbitration, sexual harassment as those have grown. And then your policy was tweaked in that area?
Yeah, mandatory arbitration, and I do want to emphasize this is mandatory arbitration of employment-related claims. So this is not the other mandatory arbitration issue related to securities litigation. I think some people are conflating the two a little bit. I think, but we just really wanted to, we tweaked the policy here. We've been using it for a number of years. And as I said before, the proposal language is a little bit of a moving target. It's changed a little bit from year to year. And so we wanted to broaden it out a little bit to make it clear. And it is a new issue as well. And so we were able to put some additional criterion into the policy that our analysts can look to. And on the sexual harassment issue, again, this is a new policy, but it's a hot topic. I think obviously with all the Me Too scandals coming out over the last couple of years and a lot of pressure on these issues. I think that coming up with a standalone policy is going to help our clients to address their own analytical frameworks for looking at them.
And then back in mid-October, ISS put out a set of preliminary FAQs about COVID-related pay decisions. I imagine we'll be seeing the final. And over the years, there have been a set of comp FAQs that ISS has put out, usually in preliminary form and then final form in the early part of the year. So here it's COVID-related comp FAQs, in the context of your pay for performance qualitative evaluation. How is ISS scrutinizing the annual and long-term incentive plans?
Yeah, the guidance that we issued on October 15th really updated what we had issued back in April, I think, which indicated sort of a more flexible approach. And it reflects the fact that we've had a lot of conversations with our institutional clients over the last few months, I think, and have really been able to get a pulse from them on what their priorities are in that regard. I think I do advise people to go read the guidance in full on our website at issgovernance.com. I think, but just to give a couple of key nuggets here, I think investors fully expect to see adjustments to short-term awards. I think the key is going to be meaningful disclosure, especially if awards are made at or above target. I think, and clearly some of the metrics that were in the plan were not met. I think, and I really do think that most companies should include some information about the board's consideration of the broader workforce and the communities within which the companies operate. I think we got a lot of sentiment from investors that in looking at those short-term issues, I think they want those stakeholder interests to be considered. I think especially at companies in some instances where 2020 was a banner year because they were in that sort of sweet spot where it was a business that actually thrived in the COVID environment rather than was hurt by it. But in many instances, those were firms where their employees were frontline and put under risk. And so I think making sure that boards were considering the interests of all their corporate constituencies was something that was high on our list for institutional clients. Retention awards, I think that they have to be real. That there should be extended vesting requirements, performance features baked into them. I think, and there should be a meaningful argument made behind them. To simply say, well, we have to retain our people, I don't think is going to be enough for our clients, and they've made that pretty clear in our conversations with them. And finally, there has been and there will continue to be a high degree of skepticism towards changes to long-term awards that are in flight, that are in progress right now. I just think that institutional investors believe these are meant to pay out over a longer period of time and reflect longer term performance. And so making sort of knee-jerk changes to them on the fly is not something that is likely to be met with a great degree of happiness from their investor bases. So just trying to pass that guidance along, what we've heard from our institutional clients, along to boards. And so we'll apply the guidance on a case-by-case basis as we go through the season and update it as required. We still have not seen a huge amount of disclosure of the actual changes that companies have made or are making as we speak right now at the end of the year. And so when we start seeing much more voluminous disclosure, perhaps we can give some updated guidance, but we'll have to wait and see how quickly it rolls out. My fear is that a lot of it is going to roll out in proxy statements, I think, and so it's going to be a case where, especially for companies that have meetings early in the year, there's not going to be sort of a fully established baseline of what typical actions are that are taking place in boardrooms, I think, and so it may be a case where we're constantly during the course of the year recalibrating the policy.
And then in terms of process, there has been a change that in recent years that ISS has provided a draft research report to companies so they can do a fact check, but that ISS won't be doing that this season. And that will enable your clients to actually get the research reports earlier, enabling them more time to read that, analyze it, and decide how they're going to vote their shares.
Yeah, it's been limited to S&P 500 companies in the U.S. We have some other markets where it's either mandated under law or whether it's consistent practice for large market cap companies as well. Here in the U.S., what we found over time, and we had this preview policy for S&P 500 companies in place for around a decade, I think, is that it became more of a lobbying exercise and less providing us with meaningful feedback on the report itself. And it rarely led to corrections of any real errors within the reports themselves. So given everything that's going on and the SEC rules that were passed, I think we just decided, given the feedback from investors that they really don't like any type of pre-review, that we'd stop doing it for S&P 500 firms, as we've always done. Companies can request and receive a copy of the published report as soon as it's available to our institutional investor clients. I think, and there's no charge for that. I think, and if there are significant errors that people find in the report, or any errors from their perspective, they can always bring them to our attention. I think of going to the ISS Help Center. I think And if we believe that the error is material, I think we will bring it to our client's attention, as we always have, through the publication of an alert. I think that actually goes out at the to even clients have already read or voted their shares. I think we'll get the alert anyway, indicating what that information, the new information is, and whether it leads to a change in our published recommendation.
So companies have to request a copy of the final report. That's not going to be automatically sent to them.
Well, sometimes companies have come and put their contact information into our system. We have the portal that they can go to, the help center, and request a copy of that report. I think, and so it's easier if companies do come in and do this in advance. But we also don't want sort of third parties coming in that don't represent the corporation trying to get a hold illicitly of those reports. So we do want some indication that this is a bona fide representative of the company that's seeking it. So it doesn't, we won't send it out to, the third party, advisors and so forth. It's got to be a contact with the company, I think. But all that can be done through the help center in advance of proxy season to make sure it's a seamless process in seeing the report when it's published.
So I don't envy you. You're a slave to the proxy season as always, and this is going to be as challenging a one as ever, even though last year was pretty crazy because it was happening in the moment. But even, it's still happening in the moment now because people are getting vaccinated and things are going to be changing hopefully in the spring. So thanks for your time and expertise as always, Pat. This has been a delight.
Thank you, Brock. And yeah, look, it's going to be another challenging proxy season, but hopefully there is light now at the end of the tunnel. So that's a good note to leave on, I guess.
Thanks.